Are you one of those students that spends countless of hours studying but retains very little information? There are a lot of you out there, but don't get me wrong, I was one of them. And it took until the latter half of my college years in order to figure out how to study properly. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can get good grades by setting yourself up for success when it comes to studying sessions, and also maintaining focus and the discipline to studying properly so that you study less but retain more information.
All right, so the first thing that you have to do is passively read the information, highlight, and
Nope. No. That's literally the opposite of what to do.
So generally speaking, things like passively reading, rereading, summarizing, and highlighting information that you learn in your lectures is not a good way to study. Instead, what you should be going for is representing the material in your own words by creating very helpful and thought out notes, and also organizing that material in such a way that allows you to grasp the main concepts. And then after that, actively recalling that information and then applying yourself by doing practice testing. That, along with spaced repetition of that material, will go a long way with your studying process.
To anyone that's new to my channel, my name is Shaunak. I will be starting medical school as a first year. In this video, I'm going to be talking about two major components that will contribute to a lot of the exam preparation and a lot of the success that you will have in order to get good grades in classes. I'm going to first talk about how to take proper notes that will optimize your studying. But the second thing that I wanted to talk about, and is a major component of this video, is the Rongie method, which is helpful for exam preparation. In all honesty, it will contribute to the most amount of success and it's what worked for me for college. Taking good notes in college is a very important way to study for a lot of your classes. The problem is, a lot of these classes are so dense that taking good notes, it's a very time-consuming process to stay organized and take notes for very, very hard concepts. So in this part of the video, I'm going to be covering 3 steps that you can take in order to take really good notes that can help you prepare for a lot of the exams that happen in college. The first step is to prepare yourself for the long run. And this means that you have to prepare yourself to take really good notes. In this phase, spend the night before skimming your lectures and the professor's notes so that you can formulate different questions in your mind that you genuinely have about the content matter. So if I had a lecture the night before, I would probably be skimming for the general idea of what the professor's going to be talking about in that lecture. What I'd be doing is seeing what he's talking about and relating it to the entire course's learning objectives. A lot of college courses have learning objectives, and that usually helps students facilitate their learning process and allow them to have a more focused way of studying the content matter. By reviewing the lecture notes with the learning objectives, you're better able to make proper connections with the content matter and see the notes in a greater context. That sets you up for better test taking when it comes to the final exam or midterms that are usually much higher in weight for the college course that you're taking. In this step, what's crucial is that you should jot down any questions or any notes that you have before the lecture happens. And this can be on the lecture slides, or it can be on any sort of device that you have, like an iPad. The second step that I would say that is really crucial for really good note-taking and optimizing retention is really engaging with the subject matter at hand in live time. This worked for me because I was able to ask the questions that I wrote down the night before. And what I usually do is I write the answer to the question by revisiting the lecture that's usually posted online. If you ask questions, the professor is able to clarify some of the things that were written down in the lecture slides. And that allows you to formulate more and more connections with the subject matter. In this phase, there's no point in writing down each and everything that the professor says, which is a big fault that I had in my earlier years of college. Lecture slides are already there, so you don't really have to write down the information because it's already represented in the way that the professor wants. The only things that you really need to write down are the main points and any sort of things that the professor clarifies. So then step 3 of this note-taking process is to revisit every single thing that you worked on, and that includes the notes that you wrote down and the questions that you had. After that, take a look at every single learning objective and make a list of all the learning objectives that are presented for that lecture. And what you should do is resynthesize that information in a more digestible way that you understand. Remember not to summarize the information, because that is not a good way to learn what that objective is. So if I were to do this on my iPad, I would write down all the learning objectives in black. I would write every single takeaway that was covered for that learning objective underneath the learning objective in blue. After that, I usually answer the questions in my own words of the questions that I initially had, so that I have a better retention of what was covered and what was clarified by the professor. For the newly synthesized questions that I had after revisiting all the lecture notes, then I would find other resources that would better explain that concept. This is where I visit really important resources on the internet or the lecture notes from other universities that post exactly the same thing. Another great source is YouTube. There are YouTube videos that literally cover everything. I will caution people because there are online resources that might have the wrong information, so definitely consult multiple resources in order to see if the information is correct. Now, I have an optional step 4, and this is where you essentially are creating flashcards based on the notes that you have synthesized thus far. A very important one, an important tool for flashcard making is Anki. Anki is a great way to space out your repetition and synthesize cards that require a lot of active recall. There are so many YouTube videos out there that explain the basics of Anki, so I would take a look at those videos. I'm gonna make a separate video on sort of how to use Anki in a college setting and how you can use Anki to better optimize your studying, especially if you're a pre-med student. Once you're done taking the best possible notes, revisit these notes every single day because that allows you to better understand the information that will be tested on your midterm and finals. If you made flashcards about the notes, then definitely do those flashcards every single day. Taking great notes is a good way to study in college. But what happens if you have multiple science classes or really hard classes that prevent you from taking optimal notes? This is where I will be talking about the Rongie method in this part of the video. I came across the Rongie method when I was watching a YouTube video that was posted by this YouTuber called Zach Hiley. Great YouTuber, by the way. He's got great content. Definitely check out his channel. So with the Rongie method, you're not learning all the content in one sweep. You're essentially first skimming the information so that you find gaps in your knowledge. And then what you have to do is write down those gaps so that you can learn it better in your own way. Okay, so why is the Rongie method really important? It's because if you have a full semester with a bunch of science classes, the Rongie method is an efficient way to study for all those classes. Each time you do the Rongie method, it takes about 9 days to complete for one class. And for each class, there are exams probably every 2 to 3 weeks. So the Rongie method is a really important tool in order to efficiently study for all the exams and do well in class. Sometimes lecture professors have a lot of information on slides, and it's really hard to organize that information in a meaningful way that allows you to understand the main point. That's why skimming the information is pretty important because you identify what's missing from your knowledge base. I never look at a PowerPoint slide or a set of lecture notes for more than 5 minutes. It usually takes, in total, since I have so many classes, it usually takes about an hour to do this. And all I'm doing is not learning the content, but filling gaps in my understanding. So then after writing it down, I basically try to find a way to understand it in my own way. We have the internet. You can literally find all sorts of information on the internet nowadays. And that includes through YouTube. There's so many YouTube videos out there that explain the concept that you are lacking in understanding. And more often than not, those YouTube videos and those sources on the internet can actually explain it much better in the ways that your professor lack in explanation. Don't get me wrong, this first part of the Rongie method, which is writing down the stuff that you don't understand, it takes several hours. I know when I used to study for exams, it took me 5 to 6 hours to pretty much write down all of the topics that I didn't understand for the class that I was taking. And this accumulated over many different classes. I call these written snippets Rongies. But then what about the things that you do understand? If you review the things that you understand, it's actually a waste of time. One other important thing that I wanted to mention is that when you're writing down the stuff that you're unsure of, it should be very specific and not generalized. So for example, in Gen Chem, right? Let's say we're going through ideal gas law. Now there are different components to ideal gas law, but if I write down in the Rongie method, if I write down describe ideal gas law or understand ideal gas law, that's a very generalized way of looking at things. Instead, I should talk about what is pressure and how does pressure fit into ideal gas law, or what is Dalton's law of partial pressures, or what's Charles' law, or what's Avogadro's law, and so on. Each day, it should take around 4 hours to do all of the review and skimming that you have to do. If you're much more efficient with your time, it should probably take around 2 to 3 hours. By the end of the second day, it should be around 60 to 70 different things that you've written down. Usually it's probably more than that for upper level and advanced classes. So I remember when I was taking biochemistry, I had around 80 Rongies that I had to learn. After writing all the Rongies down, I basically took an extra 3 to 4 days to understand everything. And by doing so, I learned every single term that I wrote down by dividing and conquering each thing every single day. All right, so we're at day 3 of 9 in the Rongie method. This means that you're done skimming, writing down your Rongies, figuring out the content gaps that you have to cover, and now you're prepared to address all those Rongies. Since we're reviewing Rongies for the next 4 days, I said earlier that you have to divide the total amount of Rongies that you have by 4 and address that number each day. So say for the biochem example where I made 80 Rongies, the first day I would be covering 20, the second day 20, the third day 20, and then the fourth day 20. Each day would be 20. So if you don't understand something, you essentially look at it holistically. You go back to your PowerPoint slides, you look on the internet, you look at YouTube videos. You have to look at all the sources of information in order to be able to talk about it in a very comprehensive way. So by understanding this information, it definitely trumps memorizing it because you're identifying the exact knowledge gap and you're able to apply yourself by explaining it in different ways. And if you have extra spare time after completing and understanding each of the 20 Rongies, essentially readdress it again and try to explain it in such a way as if you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. Do this without looking at your notes or looking at any of the stuff that you found on the internet. So that was day 3. We're at day 4, 5, and 6. What you have to do is now essentially repeat what you did on day 3. And before you cover the new set of information, what you have to do is review yesterday's information, yesterday's Rongies that you did. It's kind of like spaced repetition, like how you would normally do with Anki or any other flashcard app. This way, you're actually just revisiting things in order to see material that you covered in a very holistic way. And like I said, in days 4, 5, and 6, you're essentially repeating day 3. Okay, so your last 2 days, which would be day 7 and day 8, it would be essentially just practice testing. So usually professors are pretty good about providing resources and practice material. They usually have teaching assistants and tutors that are tasked with making practice exams and worksheets that allow you to test yourself whether you understand the material or not. So every time you practice with question and answer sort of format, you have to essentially mimic the exact exam conditions that your professor is going to give you on test day. That means that you have to allocate a specific environment and time to do this. It has to be in a quiet area, at a desk, and with a specific time limit, because that's what is on test day. After you're done taking the exam, it has to be reviewed thoroughly, and you have to make sure you have to go over each of the things that you got right and wrong. And yeah, day 9 is when you take your exam, and that's when you're essentially done. This process might seem like a long time, but if you keep practicing with this, it makes it a lot easier to do. And that's why the Rongie method is really good for exam preparation, because not only are you addressing your weaknesses and learning from them, you're also able to cover all your bases and review what's important. You're first skipping the stuff that you already know, but because you already know that, you're figuring out how to properly study for the exam and cover your bases in a shorter amount of time. You're also actively recalling information. You're practicing using the practice exams and worksheets that the professors provide for you. And then you're also employing spaced repetition. So all 3 things that you use to study effectively are encapsulated in one method. And if you do this for every single class, it makes it a lot easier to address all your exams. In this video, I covered how to properly take notes in college so that you can actively recall that information and space out your retention of that information. I also talk about the Rongie method, which is equally important, and it's more effective than the note-taking tips that I gave you in the earlier part of this video. Because the Rongie method, it makes you actively recall the information that you're learning. It also makes sure that you're spacing out the repetition of that active recall, and then also you're practicing what you are learning so that you can apply yourself on test days. This way, the Rongie method makes you do all 3 of those things in a very short amount of time. You're starting by addressing what you don't know and learning that, and then going over what you do know later on. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it, and it's helping my channel. If you like the content that I'm producing, definitely leave a like, and if you want, turn on the notifications, which is the bell icon next to the like button. Go ahead and hit that. As always, I like keeping it real with you. Peace.